Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends. We are continuing our Bible study in 1 Corinthians. I'm here with my friend, Ty Esslinger, and we are going. Ty has been working hard, right, Ty? And he's got a brand new baby, so he's tired, but that's okay. We're gonna get into the Word together and hopefully encourage one another and also encourage you. And I hope that you feel free to subscribe and hit the like button. And if you want to get an email for every time we post this every week, hit the little bell and you'll get that email. And we also thank the people that are listening on podcast. So let's get into this, Ty. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. We left off last week at the end of chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
And this section, again, just to remind us, this is Paul correcting the Corinthian church because they are misunderstanding things. He talked about they're misunderstanding the gospel, they're misunderstanding the message of the gospel. They're misunderstanding the fact that the gospel is not earthly wisdom but heavenly wisdom. Then in chapter 3 is talking about they misunderstand the gospel messenger, that men that bring the gospel, men that are ministering the word, are not special. They're fellow servants and they are accountable to God. That was the end of chapter 3, was that leaders are basically accountable to God, and they're not wise in and of themselves, but they're wise only because God has made that to be the case in the gospel. And now we're in chapter 4, and we're continuing this section that started at verse 18 of chapter 3, and we're continuing the session that basically ministers of the gospel, leaders, are accountable to God. And I want to pick up and start reading. I want to share the screen here with us. Make sure you can see that. Can you see that all right, Ty?
Yeah.
All right. And let's just go with, rather than read a big section of it, let's go through. I want to read. And as we go, we can talk about this a little bit and just see what happens here. Starting at chapter 4, verse 1, talking again about, as you can see in this bracket, leaders are accountable to God. Now, he says, this is how one should regard us. So he's talking to the church in Corinth who have a tendency to be man followers. Remember that. Remember the verse that said, some of you say you're of Apollos, and some say you're of Peter, and some say you're of Paul, and some say you're just of Christ. And he's don't be separate from each other. Don't be prejudiced towards what the other guy, who led the other guy to Christ, for example. But now he's teaching on how to esteem, how to think about leaders. He says, this is how one should regard us, the spiritual leaders, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. Now, he's talking about the wisdom of God, that the wisdom of God is a mystery compared to the wisdom of man. Man trying to figure out the gospel, it's a mystery. He can't do it because the gospel doesn't make worldly sense, that a God who perceives sinful man would extend the gospel and have his son die while that man was sinful, just to offer him free salvation. So this idea of we are servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. The mysteries of God is another term for the gospel. In fact, over in chapter 2, verse 7, it says, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom which God decreed before the ages of our glory. It's a hidden wisdom. It's a mystery. That's the gospel we proclaim. Now, let's talk about this for a second. What is a steward, Ty?
That's the word that I stopped on when I was reading through it, because it's not exactly a common word in our current English.
Especially today, yeah, you're right.
Right.
So when you think of a steward, what comes to mind?
The first thing I think about is verses talking about stewards of vineyards.
Okay.
But that's growing up in the church. If I hadn't grown up in the church, I probably wouldn't think.
Okay. Well, let's think about that though. That's okay. That's fine. A steward of a vineyard. What does the steward do?
Management.
Okay, he's management, and that's where the master would take a slave and say, "Okay, I'm going to make you steward, and I'm going to make you steward of the vineyard, or you might be steward of my shipping, or you might be steward of my household steward, where you run the household for me." And it was basically giving that steward responsibility to manage an aspect of the master's business, right? And a chief steward was basically the steward of stewards. The chief steward would be kind of the head of chief of staff, and he would run all the other stewards. Now, so when he says we're a servant of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God, he's a servant of Christ. And that word in the Greek is, I'm a slave to Christ. In other places, he used the idea of bond slave. I'm a voluntary slave of Christ. I'm a servant. Okay? That means Christ tells me where he wants me to go and what he wants me to do, and I do it. Now, that's a leader. So he's saying leaders aren't special. All we are servants who were told what to do, and we do it.
Yeah, it goes back to who gets the credit for the work.
That's right.
True.
That's right. And we're not only stewards we're not only servants of the Lord, but we're servants who have been given manager responsibilities over the gospel that is
entrusted with.
Yeah. Now that doesn't change the status of a slave. We're still slaves. We're still servants, but we're servants that God has given management responsibilities to run things. Now, in the case of a leader, I'm a steward of people that I'm ministering to. I'm a steward of my message for you. I need to manage our time together, and you on YouTube. I need to be a steward of my time, that I can prepare these Bible studies so that I can share them with you and manage the time. So our time is 30 minutes or 35 minutes, and it doesn't run on and on and on. I've got a plan, and it's up to me to work the plan, answering to my master, the Lord Jesus Christ. That makes sense? So he's saying here, he's basically saying, going back to this verse, he's basically saying, now this is how you should regard us. You should regard us as just fellow slaves. We're fellow servants. We are given different responsibilities, perhaps, but we're just fellow servants. So don't regard us as some kind of special Superman or something. Just regard us as a fellow servant. He said that earlier up here in the chapter, that we are just leaders, are fellow workers and God's servants, right? And so here again, he's saying, this is how you should regard us. And then he goes, moreover, in other words, on top of that, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. So a master would not make a servant who doesn't follow orders a steward, right? If I'm going to have a servant manage my household, I'm going to pick a servant who manages it well and
Yeah.
doesn't just ignore me and does whatever he wants to do, right? So
Yeah.
he's saying we're servants of Christ and we're stewards. We're managing the gospel to you, and it is required of us as managers of the gospel that we are faithful. We follow orders. You see what he's saying there? Now that begins to be a question for me, and I wrote it right there in my Bible, that if I'm a steward of the mystery of God, the steward of the gospel, and every one of us that has somebody that we want to share the gospel with, we are managing that little aspect of the gospel and sharing the good news of Christ with our friends, family, fellow workers, whatever. And it's up to us to be faithful as stewards of that little piece of the mystery of God, to share it and to share it well, and not share it as if we're special. And if you're a servant who loses perspective on that, and you think you're hot stuff and you think you're special just because you're obeying what Christ has told you to do, therefore you are somehow special.
There are a few sections in this chapter where it feels like he's saying, so you think you're special.
Yeah. And you think we're special.
Yeah.
You shouldn't think you're special, and you shouldn't think that the spiritual leaders are special, because we're all just fellows under the master. And so he's going here, it is required of stewards that we be found faithful. Now, the first question that I asked myself was, does Christ find me faithful? In me being a servant of Christ and a steward of the good news in my life, am I faithful? Now, that might mean, am I just living it out so people at work know that I'm a Christian? Or am I living it out with my wife and my child so that they can tell that I've got a master and that I'm obeying that master? Am I being faithful? And so that's a great question to ask ourselves and to really meditate on. In my Christian life, and my Christian life as I'm leading somebody. I'm a servant of Christ, and he's put me in charge of something little. It could be tiny, but he's put me in charge of something. And it's up to me to be faithful to that. And so that's a question I can sit back and say, okay, I'm going to stop the Bible study here, and I'm just going to ask myself the question, and I'm going to pray about, Lord, am I being faithful to what you're calling me to do? Or am I sloughing off? Or am I refusing to obey? If that's the case, I've got business to do with God, right?
Yeah, because the word stewards, it's tied to the mysteries of God, which is the gospel, right? Yep. So,
and the mystery, that's not just in presentation, that's living the gospel.
Yeah.
I mean, he talked about that in the first chapter. It's not just talking the talk, it's living the good news in us. It's having people see us. And he's going to tie that in a second, because in a second he's going to say, you guys need to follow my example. Not as somebody special, but as just a fellow worker who is faithful to what God has given him to do. And you guys need to follow that example. He's going to show that in just a few verses.
Mm-hmm.
That's starting to make sense. So this isn't everybody's got to be a preacher. Everybody's got to be a leader in the church even. No, this is everybody's got a role to play to present the mystery of the gospel of Christ, the good news of Christ in their lives to other people. And it could be to your wife, it could be to your child, it could be to your coworkers, it could be to your family, friends, whoever. But there's a little piece, we've talked about this before, Ty, where we've talked about divine appointments, right?
Yeah.
Where God brings somebody into your life and he's taught you something from the word, and he brings somebody into your life and you go, well, I don't want to talk about Jesus. Well, are we being faithful to what God is doing in our lives, to live that out in a way that shows that we're Christians. And that's a moment of meditation and a moment of real prayer. And it could be an action moment of saying, look, wow, I have not been very faithful. And I'm going to watch for opportunities to be a faithful servant of Christ. Now, that may mean that if somebody sees me at work and I smash my finger, that they're going to see me not swear. They just want to. I just want to be a functioning believer, that they know something is different about me because of my relationship with Christ.
Right. Or if there's like pretty much anywhere that there's a crowd of people in a workplace, there's gossip. Yeah. Whether it's guys, girls, whatever, sure. It does not matter. There is gossip.
There's a million ways that we can show that we're faithful stewards of the Lord, just by not participating in off-color jokes, and standing up for racism and saying that we're all created in God's image, and I just don't believe in any racism. Just because as a Christian, Christ died for everybody. He loves everybody. Wow, that's a statement. Now he goes on, and it's interesting because he says, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. Now, here's the question. Faithful to who or to whom? They're required to be faithful to whom?
Faithful in the mysteries of God, but yet that's also to God.
Okay. They're faithful in the mysteries of God, but they're faithful to the master.
The master, yes.
Right? And he said in the verse, we're servants of Christ, and I need to be as a steward of the gospel, a steward of that piece of the gospel, presenting myself as a Christian. I need to be faithful, not to other people, but faithful to the master. So I don't want to be a people pleaser, where I'm trying to be faithful to what their expectations are. I want to be faithful to the expectations of Christ. Now, he's going to go on with verse 3, right into this. He says, but with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you. Let's go to the next verse. That I should be judged by you, or any human court, in fact. I do not even judge myself. Now, he's talking about judgment in this area of being faithful to Christ. He says, I don't answer to you. And if there's gossip about me, or there's somebody says, oh, you shouldn't do that, hey, I got to do what Christ wants me to do, because I'm his servant and I'm his steward. And I don't worry about being judged by other people. I worry about being judged by God and the Lord and what he has asked me to do. And then he goes, I'm not aware, in verse 4, I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. He said, just because I'm not aware of something, I'm not saying I'm free of sin. There could be something I'm not even aware of yet. And then he says this in verse 4, it is the Lord who judges me. Now, I'm not worried about being judged by people, what people are going to say about me. Because you can't please everybody. You can't worry about pleasing everybody. You have to please the Lord. You have to be a servant and a faithful steward to the Lord. And if people come at you and say, well, this is that, and the other thing, hey, all I got to do is worry about being a faithful follower of Christ and be faithful to what Christ has asked me to do. And as a servant, getting up in the morning and saying, Master, what do you want me to do today? What do you have for me today? And it could be just, I want you to reflect me to your fellow workers. When something goes wrong, I want your fellow workers to see that you're not flying off the handle, that you're reflecting the peace of Christ in your life. Now, go ahead.
So like 3 through 5 is kind of all talking about judgment and who judges.
Actually, this whole section from 18, where it says, "Let no one deceive you, as anyone thinks he is wise in this age, you become a fool." From 18 all the way down to chapter 4, verse 5.
Okay.
This section that leaders are not special. Leaders are accountable to God. And that's this whole idea he's getting to, saying, hey, I'm just a servant and a steward of the mystery. And I don't worry about being judged by you. I worry about being judged by my master.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, as far as I know, I'm not doing anything wrong, but it's up to God to judge me. Now, he's not talking about judgment of salvation here. He's talking about judgment of me being faithful as a servant.
Okay.
All right? This is not judgment as in, I'm going to judge you and decide if you're going to heaven or hell. These are Christians. And he's talking specifically about Christian leaders who are stewards of God, servants of Christ. And he's saying, I just need to be faithful to the master. And if you guys want to judge me, you can. And I can't worry about that. Okay? I got to worry about Jesus judging me. So I got to get up in the morning and say, I want to do what you want me to do today. And at night, I want to say, Lord, I hope I did what you commanded me to do. And if I didn't, I need to confess that and help me tomorrow. Be obedient, be an obedient steward, be an obedient servant.
Mm-hmm. I think I was thinking a little generally.
Yeah, and
I wrote.
Be careful, because just because he says judge, this is not judgment of salvation. This is judgment of you as a servant of Christ. And the leaders, he's basically saying in the context here, all the way down to verse 5, he's basically saying, hey, leaders are not special, and leaders are certainly not above the judgment of Christ. Christ tests a leader. And if we're a leader who starts to forget that I'm a servant of Christ and I'm doing my own thing, and I think I'm a law unto myself and I'm the one who decides what to do and everything, I'm in trouble as a spiritual leader. And it's up to God to judge that and discipline me, not salvation. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it just it made me start thinking about, it is the Lord that judges, but like so often of the time, like if you catch yourself judging somebody else, you don't immediately think, I'm judging this person because I know better than God. But that is a little bit like what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, the scriptures are clear that we should not try to judge people whether they're saved or not saved. But we can judge their actions. And if we determine that a brother who says, I'm a Christian, but his actions are off the charts, we can come and say, hey, brother, I'm not any better than you are, but I'm noticing something about your life, and you need to take that to the Lord. You're the ultimate. Yeah. You're the ultimate answerable to the master, not to me.
Right.
And so there's a certain amount of judgment, but not judging whether I can't judge your heart. I can't see into your mind and into your motives, but I can see your actions. And if you tell me I'm a Christian,
that's why it says to judge them by their fruit.
That's exactly right. But we don't judge. Hey, look at you're not a Christian. I can say there's something wrong because you're not acting very much like a Christian. I've met with men who, for example, who say, "Man, I don't have any peace. I don't have any confidence in my faith. I can't understand the Bible. I can't do anything, and I can't I can't be a good person. I just can't obey God or anything else." And I said, you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like to me you may not be a Christian. No, I can't tell. But I want you to evaluate. Have you accepted Christ as your Savior and Lord? Have you submitted to him as Lord? Are you submitted to him as a servant who's trying to be faithful to the master? Now, this idea of it is the Lord who judges you in verse 4 is a great, a cross-reference I've got that is David, where he's praying to the Lord. In Psalm 139, at the end of Psalm 139, David says this. He's praying to God, and he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any grievous way in me." Some versions say wicked way, but it's see if there's anything I'm doing that grieves you, and lead me in the way everlasting. So basically he's saying, Lord, he's not praying, I hope I'm saved. He knows he's got a relationship with God, and he's asking God, I want you to really look into my thoughts, because sometimes I even fool myself. I mean, I can lie to myself real easy.
Justifying it comes naturally.
Yeah. But if I go, I am a servant of Christ, and Lord, you please search my heart. And that comment that he made, and it says, as far as I know, I haven't done anything wrong, but that doesn't mean I haven't.
Yeah.
That means I need to answer to the Lord who judges my heart. I don't answer to you guys. I answer to the Lord, and it's up to him to judge my heart. And so a prayer could be, Lord, try me, judge me, see if there's anything in my heart, and bring that to my attention. And as a servant and as a steward, I want to work on that, because my desire is to please you, not to be a man pleaser.
Yeah. Sorry if you want to finish that.
Go ahead.
Because I was going to kind of split to, because this is talking about judgment, and generally you kind of think of judgment as negative, because you don't want to be described as judgmental.
Yeah,
yet you're called.
That's true, but judgment is not always negative.
Right.
All judgment is a kind of an assaying of the value of something.
Yeah.
For example, judging fruit. Is it good fruit or is it bad fruit? I could judge it and say, this is choice fruit.
So
I've judged it to decide that.
Yeah, it made me think of like judgment versus discernment. Like, how would you, if somebody asked you what the differences were,
Well, I would say that man is given discernment. In fact, discernment is a gift of the Holy Spirit. But judgment is the realm of God. Now, I can judge only in the context of discerning that your words are different than your actions. But I can't judge your heart. God can judge your heart. I can discern your actions don't match your words. And I can come to you and say, hey, you say you're a brother, and I just want to bring this to your attention that there's an issue here. That's the verse that talks about if you see a brother sinning, if you help him repent, that's a good thing. It's not judging and not coming to a guy and say, I'm judging you. The idea of judging and assaying the heart, that's God's domain. And the point Paul is making here, that as a leader, I am not above that judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a leader, and I'm answerable to God. I'm not above that. And if I start to act like I'm above that, then it's time to have God give me some discipline. And we could, in this context, this would be, I'm judged by God. That would be where, hey, you're not being a faithful steward, so maybe you need a spanking. That's discipline.
Yeah.
That's not salvation. That's just correction. And God is the only one who's able to look into your thoughts, into your heart. and really see. And that's what David is asking in Psalm 139. He said, try me, look into my heart, and see if there's any wicked way in me. See if there's any unrighteousness in me. And if there is, then Lord, use the Holy Spirit to bring that to my attention. That's a great prayer. That's a great prayer. Because I can slip into stuff like Paul says, as far as I know, I haven't done anything wrong, but I have to rely on God, who is the judge. I can't even judge myself. In fact, he's going to say, I don't even judge myself. You guys can't judge me. And I don't even judge myself. The judge is up to God. Now, that's not judgment for salvation. That's judgment for how are you doing? How's your fruit? You know, Jesus is a fruit inspector. And he's saying, hey, Ty, you know, you're a Christian and you're my servant and you're walking faithfully and I'm judging your fruit. And I say your fruit is choice. Mm-hmm. You're doing good. You got a couple of little blemishes, but hey, you're good. And let's work on the blemishes. He could also say, hey, you know, your fruit's kind of stunted. Let's work on that. That's between you and the Lord. And all Paul is saying here is to the Corinthian church, and this is important. Yeah, you Corinthians, don't start worshiping these guys. Don't start putting these guys on pedestal, because these leaders are nothing but servants who are answerable to God. And they need to worry about being faithful as servants and stewards to God, because God is going to judge their stewardship. Right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to be a spiritual leader, and all of us are spiritual leaders to one aspect or another, I need to go, Lord, help me. You know, like David prayed, you judge my heart. Let me know if there's a problem. He doesn't say, Lord, I have judged my heart and I'm okay. He said, no, you examine me because you're the judge. And you inspect my fruit. And so we get to that into that verse, and he says in verse 5, therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. There again, the heart is God's domain. And you don't try to pronounce judgments and say, this is in the context of leadership. Don't try to say, this leader is so good, I need to just follow him blindly. No, we need to follow Christ blindly. And we need to think about our pastors, our spiritual leaders, as just fellow servants who are serving the Lord and being as faithful as they can be. And if a pastor stumbles, we don't go, I'm giving up the faith because so-and-so screwed up. No, you just go, I'm not going to pronounce judgment up beforehand. God is the judge. He will handle things. He'll discipline when there needs to be discipline, as he disciplines in my life when there needs to be discipline. So in this context, he's saying, don't start following after guys, your pastors and that, who are blessed men and godly men, but they're men and they're fellow servants. And that's the context that he's doing here. Right? Mm-hmm. And he's saying, if you as a church member start to go off and say, I'm a man follower, I'm following Pastor so-and-so and not Pastor so-and-so. I think Pastor so-and-so is a little off. And I like Pastor so-and-so because I judge that he's good. Oh, boy, we got to be careful not to pronounce judgment before the end, when the Lord pronounces the judgment. And we're not talking salvation. We're talking judgment of the quality of the faithfulness, right? From verse 3.
Yeah, but typically what I hear,
that's clear. We got to be careful as Christians not to see the word judge and go, that's automatically means salvation. No. It just means evaluating the quality. I'm judging whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whether it needs work, whether it needs help, whatever. And he's basically saying, hey, it's the Lord who judges me. So I need to be thinking about what pleases the Lord and not thinking about what pleases people who are following me.
Would you say the difference between judgment and judgment is the process of evaluating,
Right?
and discernment is
Is observing. Now, the way I would make the distinction would be, we would evaluate and we would make a distinction. We would have a perception that something doesn't line up. But we got to be careful not to judge. We cannot evaluate the worth of the heart. We can't look into the motive.
Right.
We can't do it. But we can observe the life. So if I'm observing the life of a man, of my pastor, whoever it is, and I observe sin, he's caught in some sin, and all of us are sinners, that happens.
Right.
I need to be careful not to judge him as I'm looking into his heart and say, oh, he's not a believer, he's a phony, he's whatever. I got to leave that up to the Lord. But I can discern that I need to be careful about what he has taught me and make sure that I get this sound doctrine from somebody else.
Right.
Just because I've discerned there's an issue. But I don't judge him as in what is his motivation, what's his heart, that's between him and God is the judge.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So we are to be perceptive. We are to pay attention. But we're not to be man followers to say, oh, it's this guy and he's it, and I have pronounced judgment that I have decided he's the quality guy and nobody else is. That was a problem in the Corinthian church. That's why there was divisions in the Corinthian church. And that's what Paul is addressing. Divisions after being man followers. Now we've gone 38 minutes and we've done 5 verses.
That sounds about right.
So what were you going to say?
Typically when I hear people saying that they prefer one person's teaching over another, it's they don't even really talk about doctrinal stuff. It's more like, I like his teaching style.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I like the way that he talks.
And
it's more engaging.
There's nothing wrong with liking a guy. What's wrong is where you say, I like this guy, and anybody who likes somebody else is off.
Oh.
And that's what he means when I'm a follower of Apollos and others are a follower of Peter, and say, man, if you don't follow Peter, you're just not a Christian. And so that creates division in the church. That becomes factions in the church. And it's important at the end of verse 5, he says that don't pronounce judgment. And then he says this, the Lord, before the Lord comes, who, the Lord, will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation. Now that's important to see, that word is not condemnation. This is in the context of the Lord is evaluating believers to commend them for being faithful servants.
Yeah, commend is like reward.
That's right.
And condemn is like punish.
That's right. And it's not saying condemn. These are believers. These are Christians. And the idea is, I want to lead a life as a good steward and a faithful servant for the commendation, not worried about the condemnation, right? So I answered to the Lord. Now look, we got 5 verses done. Holy cow. That happens sometimes. You get into this. But that's so important for us to get. It's important for us to get this. We're going to stop there. We're going to start now from verse 6 all the way to the end of the chapter. We see this bracket over here in my notes. This is the Corinthian church not only misunderstood that the leadership, the ministry leadership, and the fact that they were just fellow servants, but they also misunderstand Paul's specific ministry. And he says, you guys have been misunderstanding what I've been trying to do in the church. And he's going to talk about that next week. And we're going to pick up at verse 6 Man, terrible. We got 5 verses done in 40 minutes. That was long. Sorry it's taken so long, but boy, this is important to get. I hope you were blessed by this. I hope this is an encouragement to you, and it's an encouragement to evaluate. How am I doing as a servant of Christ? Am I being faithful in what Christ is asking me to do, and not worrying about what men are asking me to do, and not being a man follower, but a faithful servant, standing on my own, saying, the Lord's the one that's going to decide if I get a commendation and get a blessing. The Lord bless you. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the little bell, and you'll get one next week. Brother, I appreciate you sticking with us. I know you're tired, but it's been a good Bible study. Hope you learned something good. I'm signing off. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week.